Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this fabulous webinar. I'm Lynn Rubenstein, I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Recycling Council. And on your screen, you're also seeing Terry Goldberg, the Executive Director of NMOA, who's a co-host for this webinar, and our four wonderful panelists, Heidi Sanburn from California, Karen Hamilton, Emily Coleman, and Andy Smith from King County, Washington, and I will be doing their bios in a few moments. As a quick reminder, the webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent the link for this and the presentations within the next 24 hours. Please use your question box, and I will tell you where that is in a moment, to pose questions. We're not going to be monitoring hands raising. So let me just run through the mechanics of the whole thing. So on your right-hand side, you'll see a little orange arrow, and you click on that, and that will drop down a dashboard, and then you see the question box, and you want to open the question box and type in your question, and then we will ask all questions for all presenters at the end of the webinar. But until then, we're going to have the delight of hearing from our speakers. So I'm going to read their bios first. Heidi will be the first presenter, but let me just do everybody's bios, and then we're just going to get right into the substance of everything. Heidi Sanburn is the Executive Director of the National Stewardship Action Council. She has been a leader in the solid waste industry for 30 years, focused on source reduction and implementation of cost-effective projects that support a circular economy. Collaborating with local government leaders, Heidi was one of the two original co-directors of the California Product Stewardship Council, a nonprofit formed in 2007 to change the way waste management is funded in California. She has since become an internationally recognized thought leader and advocate for producer responsibility policies and programs. In 2015, she and the Product Stewardship Council Board formed the National Stewardship Action Council, of whom she's now the Executive Director. The Council is a nonprofit organization that advocates for a circular economy using product stewardship and extended producer responsibility. Heidi has recently been awarded the SWANA Community Award and is the chair of California's new statewide commission on recycling markets and curbside recycling. So very qualified, also equally qualified. Karen Hamilton is a sustainable purchasing program manager for King County Procurement and Payables in Seattle, Washington. Under her leadership, King County agencies are institutionalizing the purchase of many sustainable products and services and realizing significant fiscal, environmental, and social benefits in the process. Her program has won numerous awards and has been presented as a model for other jurisdictions in various publications and at national and international conferences. King County is a founding member of the Responsible Purchasing Network and the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. Andy Smith is our sole male on today's panel, is the Market Development Program Manager for King County's Solid Waste Division. King County's Linked Up program works to expand markets for selected recyclable and reusable materials by facilitating an interactive community of businesses, public agencies, and other organizations. Recognizing the central role markets play in a responsible recycling system, the program is pivoting to focus on plastic, paper, and organics. It is working to evidence the clean growth opportunities of the circular economy. Before joining King County, Andy was a senior policy advisor for the UK government, working on various briefs, including climate targets, clean growth, sustainable trade, and natural resources policy. And last, somebody has to be last but not least, is Emily Coleman. She's a sustainability purchasing specialist for King County, Washington. In this role, she works for both King County's procurement and payables section within the Sustainable Purchasing Program and in its solid waste division. This cross-agency partnership allows her to bridge the gap between market development for recycled materials and products and government procurement. Currently, her work focuses on driving demand for organics and plastics with recycled content. She has a master's degree in environmental policy from the University of Washington. So I'm so delighted to have all these esteemed presenters with us. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to make Heidi our presenter. And we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from her. So thank you, Heidi.
Thank you so much. So we are going to start by making sure the technology works and we can show my screen. And let's see where my screen is here. There it is. So I've got to do this and then view. Where is it? Sorry, I always forget where to go for the
You can also go to the bottom of the screen if you want. But keep going where your little arrow is. Go up a couple to the left and do slideshow. Up at the top. Up, there you go. Close.
There we go.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Thank you.
Now, you're welcome. So hopefully you can see everything correctly now. I cannot see myself or any of you there. Now I can see myself.
We can see
very good. Thank you.
We can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here. What a great crowd. I think we've already got 250 people on the line. So this is a very timely discussion. And I want to thank Lynn and Terry and the gang for putting this on and having invited me to present with you today. So what we were going to talk about is, and are going to talk about, is minimum content legislation and how that has driven market development and how to do it right, or at least learn from the lessons that we've learned in California, since we've done probably, I think, more recycled content legislation than any other state. And I've got 20 minutes, I've got my timer on, so I'm going to get right into it and start with who is the National Stewardship Action Council. I helped form this in 5 years ago, and I am the executive director. We are a 501c4, so we can actually lobby in any state in the nation. We are working to drive a circular economy, and part of that is through things like producer responsibility. And to me, recycled content mandates are actually a form of producer responsibility. They're very specific about what the producers must do. And our vision is that the US, altogether, all of us, will achieve a circular economy. My vision is that it's by 2030. I know that's going to be a long shot, but we've got to try because things are not going well now. And we have to move a lot faster and have a lot more impact. And we're doing that, and hopefully we'll do that through collaboration with all of you. Our board is made up of people from all over the country, including David Stitzall, our president with Full Circle Environmental, who's right up there in Washington State. Tim Goncharoff from Santa Cruz County has led more EPR ordinances in the country than any other county. Patty Garbarino with Marin Sanitary Service. She is a leader in our waste hauling industry in California, and her father started curbside recycling in the country, first in the nation in Marin County, and then Constance Hornick, who's with SWANA and does World Bank work for landfills and waste management around the world. And then we've got other board members from all over the country. Bob Geddert's in Ohio, Beverly's Colorado, Jordan and Maya are in Texas. And I do want to highlight that we've got a diverse board that I feel reflects the country, and we're very proud of that. And I hope all of you will work to make sure that we're all reflecting all the different people and demographics in our country. So I'm proud of all these board members and thank them all for their hard work. So circular economy, how do we get there and what is it? It's designing out waste and pollution first, keeping the products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. And I think recycled content mandates actually work on numbers 1 and 2, not necessarily regenerating natural systems, but it's a key part of how we're going to get to a circular economy. So in California, I'm going to focus very narrowly on California and what we've done on market development laws, what has worked, what hasn't. We've got a lot of voluntary efforts as well. I'm going to touch on just one of them briefly at the end, and then talk to you about the pending legislation we have on the governor's desk today that has a new recycled content mandate. And I'll start with our state agency Buy Recycled campaign. This campaign, believe it or not, was passed in legislation in 1989. It's 31 years old. And it's a joint effort between our state waste agency, CalRecycle, and the Department of General Services to require purchases made by the state include post-consumer recycled content products. It requires annual reporting. The initial program has only covered 11 categories of materials, and I will talk about that. It's at least 50% of the purchases of the state must have this recycled content mandate be met. Again, that starts really carving into the impact of the bill, and it's minimum recycled content requirements per category. And because our state is so big, we have big dollars to invest in driving this part of circularity and market development. So you can see here, this is from the annual report in 1819 by the state, that and the compliance rate is in that third column. But the SABRAC compliance spending is much higher in some categories of products than in others. So the products, the 11 products I mentioned, are on the left, including antifreeze, organics, glass products, metals, etc. Then the total dollars that have been reported by state agencies in those categories of what they've purchased, the total spent that are compliant with the recycled content mandate is the next column. And then that second to last column is a percent of compliant spending. You can see at the bottom, we've got tires is only 6% compliance, with the high of 93% at the top with antifreeze. Wild differences. So clearly this is not 31 years later. We have not maximized the use of this program. I'm going to talk about on the State Recycling Commission what we're going to do about this. And again, not even all the agencies are reporting to the state. So there's a lack of enforcement. So compliance, again, in dollars, is that 80% of the total dollars spent were compliant, which is good. And that's $336 million of purchases, which can drive a lot of good behavior and circularity, but 20%, 82 million is not. So we've still got a long way to go, even with a 31-year-old program, which tells me it needs an update. State agency by recycled campaign purchases versus the statewide product purchases are very small. It's only 13% of state purchases of $2.6 billion. We're leaving 87% of our total spending on the table to drive markets in California. And that is a huge waste, and we are going to fix that. So opportunities for improving this program are that we're going to clarify that this program covers all purchases of goods by the state agencies and our contractors. That is not in the current procurement standard. That it includes service contracts where the contractor is purchasing reportable products again. Revising the product categories, because we've only got these 11 product categories. They're very limited. We want to expand that. And then limit recycled content purchases and update every 3 years at a minimum. Removing the requirement to purchase only when it's available at a lesser cost. That's not necessarily helping to drive new markets. As you know, they start more expensive and then the prices come down, just like solar panels. Codifying CalRecycle's established process on how they do this for non-compliant agencies and provide more enforcement tools, which is needed. Their annual mandatory online training for procurement officers, that should happen. And then clarifying the definition of compost. They're currently saying that organics have 85% recycled content, and that doesn't even make sense because obviously it's 100%. So that's our suggestions on how to fix our state agency by recycled campaign, which is a huge market driver, and it's basically a recycled content driver as well. Now, specifically by material type, we have the Rigid Plastic Packaging Container Program, RPPC. It passed in 1991, and it has been amended several times, but again, it's 29 years old. And this law actually required the product manufacturers that sell products in the RPPC category, which I'll talk about in a minute, meet several compliance options, one of several. And one of the complaints about this bill is that we gave too many compliance options, which allows companies to basically meet it by what they were planning to do anyway. So one of the compliance options is that they meet 25% post-consumer material, which is great, but another one is lightweighting, and then there's others. So a lot of them haven't chosen the post-consumer recycled content option. So then again, did it really get to the root of the issue? I would say not completely. So we've got penalties in there, but they're not enough. 100,000 annually for big companies, that's not a big driver. And again, what are RPPCs? Just to give you a sense, you can go to the CalRecycle website and get more information. There's a quick checklist, but they self-determine, the companies do. And then you can see it's a diverse group of manufacturers, includes adhesives, cleaning products, hardware, paints and coatings, all different kinds of containers for these different products. And it can be buckets, jugs, clamshells, pails, tubes. There's all kinds of things in this bill, which makes it kind of complicated. And again, there's too many ways to comply. So things that could be fixed with this program include that, limiting compliance options and just focusing on the recycled content mandate at least as a minimum, and then it could be plus all these other things. And CalRecycle historically did not focus on enforcement on these types of programs, and they haven't done an enforcement order since 2018. I've heard they just sent a letter out because they've been getting pressure. Oh no, that was on the bag ban, I'll talk about that. But again, self-relying on the producers, maybe we should require a third-party verifier. If we're gonna require recycled content, we're not actually sure it is recycled content without the enforcement and oversight tools and a third-party verification. So those are the kinds of things that this program we could have as improvements and lessons for all of you if you're looking at passing recycled content legislation, is making sure you've got an adequate enforcement hammer, you've got third-party verification of the volumes sold and the recycled content. There's agency oversight funding by the producers, because this program did not have it, and CalRecycle is constantly struggling to staff it. They need to be more on top of the program, but again, that's because they don't have the funding. And then update and limit the compliance methods, as we've discussed. So the third big effort is in recycled content has been our newsprint law. This is also fairly old. I think this is from the 80s as well. And of course, we're seeing less and less recycled newspapers. You don't even hardly see these types of newspapers anymore. My dad gets the New York Times, and I think it's, tiny, tiny now compared to what it used to be. So the volume of newsprint is going way down, but this law actually worked pretty well. It required 40% post-consumer by weight in newsprint. And that was a big driver for recycling newsprint in California for a very long time, until the volume of newspapers is going down. At least 50% of the newsprint used for printing and publishing at commercial printers in California must be recycled content. That was also in the law. And consumers, like printers and publishers, suppliers and manufacturers, must comply with the program. So again, I gave you the link there. You can check it out. But my suspicion is, this is going to become less and less important as other materials are the priority with less newsprint out there. You still could improve the program, though, by requiring third-party verification of the producers reporting again. The hammer, one of the hammers is fining, but you could ban the sale in California for non-compliance, which is always a very big hammer because we're such a big state, 14% or 12% of the market in the US. You could pay again for oversight of the state enforcement and oversight costs. If you don't fund that, and their agencies are scraping people together trying to do this work, it never works out long-term. We haven't seen it work out once. So definitely make sure these manufacturers are paying for government oversight. And then the quality standards for recycled content were last updated in 2010, and that could probably be updated as well. So that is another example and some lessons learned. The fourth example on recycled content is our plastic trash bag program. Currently requires that trash bag manufacturers use a minimum of 10% of post-consumer material to produce the trash bags that are sold in California, or another compliance option is 30% recycled content across the entire line of plastic products sold. So that's a really big option, which could make a big difference for companies. But again, you wonder, is that too much wiggle room? Or is it a better thing to see other products have recycled content as well? Non-compliant companies are ineligible for award of state contracts. So that's a nice hammer, but it's really not a big enough hammer. And CalRecycle is authorized to audit companies, but again, they aren't being funded to audit companies, which is expensive, especially when those companies are out of state. And many of them are for most of you. We happen to be a big manufacturer of trash bags for some reason. So that's not as big of an issue for us, but it could be for you, and that could be very costly. So if you don't give the government oversight money, it might not work because you do need audits. Again, so the improvements that could be made is the requirement of audits, requiring producers pay for that oversight. The penalties should increase and be banned, the products be banned from sale, not just be ineligible for state contracts. Again, a bigger hammer. And then the enforcement orders really need to be imposed. We have, if you go to the CalRecycle website, they've got pages of non-compliant companies with this law. And again, there's no sense in passing laws if we're not going to have enforcement. So I really encourage you to look strongly. If you're at the place where you're trying to get a bill and the enforcement has been taken out, it's almost better not to do the bill, because then people think it's done and they don't worry about it anymore when nothing's really going to happen. The fifth case study is glass. In glass, manufacturers are required in our state to use at least 35% post-consumer recycled glass, or 25% if the cullet is mixed. It also required fiberglass insulation manufacturers to use at least 30% post-consumer glass. So this just didn't require it on the glass-to-glass folks. This was fiberglass manufacturers had to use post-consumer glass, which was a huge driver for the market. Very, very helpful. In recent years, the two industries in California have used more than 700,000 tons of cullet a year. And we're literally fighting over it now. We cannot get enough glass back. So this is a real great story of success. We've also implemented a quality incentive payment designed to improve the quality of the glass. As you know, a lot of us went to curbside commingled programs, and we basically scrambled the egg by scrambling all the glass and breaking it, and then trying to sort it by color, et cetera, is very, very difficult. So we've got an incentive for a cleaner product. And because this program is working so well, there's really not much to do to improve it except to update the recycled content number to 50%. We're right now averaging 46% recycled content in our bottles. We are a net exporter of bottles because we're such a big winemaking state. We send our wine all over the country and the world and don't use this. So the problem we're having now is we just don't have enough glass to even go to 50%. We have to get better at collection and keeping it clean. So on plastic bags, I wanted to bring up the reusable plastic bag law, the ban, because in California, it does have a requirement for, if you're not gonna, if you're banning the single-use plastic bags, you could use reusable plastic bags that are much thicker, and it requires that all paper and reusable bags meet specific requirements and recycled content requirements. So that is also a driver. There's it does pay for state agency oversight. It does require third-party verification of producers. And it narrows the exception for reusable bag producers that demonstrates their bags meet reusability, recycling, and recycled content standards. So this is an option for all of you. We did learn some of the lessons and get them into this reusable bag law. And I did want to share with you the bill that's on the governor's desk right now, AB 793. It requires plastic beverage manufacturer containers be subject to that are under the bottle bill in California to contain post-consumer recycled content. Starting in January of 2022, they have to have at least 15% post-consumer material. By 2025, it has to be 25%, and by 2030, 50%. So we're very excited about this. It is the toughest plastic bag or plastic bottle recycled content law. It exceeds the European Union standards even. It does provide some off-ramps for companies that seek waivers. If CalRecycle is in a good mood, they might let too many of these waivers happen, so we're gonna have to watch this. Under the bill, the manufacturers missing the targets are subject to penalties, which are about 20 cents a pound, but that is a big enough differential that I think it's going to be meaningful. And then the fees are deposited into a recycling enhancement penalty account to be used for recycling, infrastructure, collection, and processing of plastic beverage bottles. This bill was vetoed by the governor last year. It's on his desk. He has, I think, until the 12th to sign it. And or the 11th, and we're very eager and hopeful that he will sign it. So in short, we have to think differently. We're moving way too slow. I mean, some of these bills have been around 30 years and they're still not working optimally. And as advocates and people who care about these things, we've got to think differently. We are not going to get circular in our lifetime if we don't move a lot faster. And the definition of insanity, as Einstein said, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So I hope these examples give you tools so that if you do write recycled content legislation, it works. That's my timer, I know I'm up, so I'll go fast. But one of the other examples about thinking differently is in our carpet stewardship law, we actually updated it to add eco-modulated fees that will drive recycled content. It's not specific to recycled content. It's saying that we're going to put a fee that's much higher on carpet that does not have a lot of good environmental attributes, and those that have good environmental attributes like high recycled content would have little or no fee. And this is very, very important. Europe is doing this a lot, and we're the first in the nation that I know of to do this. And this eco fee on the carpet receipts in California does get people's attention. But again, they're widely used in Germany and Europe. I could go through all these slides. I don't want to go over my time too much, but this is a tool in your toolbox, and do use it. The Europeans, I think they've mandated all products under EPR have to have an eco-modulated fee by 2023. And some products in these different countries have gone way above and beyond on the eco-modulated fees to drive and show the consumer this is not an environmentally preferable product versus what is. And the price point is really what's going to change the purchasing decisions. Lastly, really quick, I'll say that we have a recycling market development zone program. It is voluntary. It does drive markets. It does create some infrastructure, but it's not recycled content. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can go to the CalRecycle website. But I did want to share with you, as chair of the California Statewide Commission on Markets and Curbside Recycling, we are taking comments from anywhere and considering them, because we're going to be giving recommendations to the California legislature on recycled content and anything that's going to help us solve our waste problems by January 1st. So I would encourage you to go to this website, sign up for the listserv. It's very easy. Type your email in and they'll send you automatic updates when the agendas are posted. And you can also submit comments. And it's very easy to submit a comment and a suggestion of a policy we should consider recommending to the legislature or also to CalRecycle. So it could be regulatory changes or policy changes at the state level. And again, this is the public comment portal, and I'm sure that this PowerPoint will be made available to you. So just thinking, you know, that leaders think and talk about the solutions, followers think and talk about the problems. So I know and have confidence that all of you are the leaders in talking about solutions, and recycled content is one big one, trying to get us to circularity. So thanks again, Lynn, for the time, and I'll look forward to taking questions. And
thank you, Heidi. That was fabulous. And there are a number of questions, but we're not going to ask them yet. So just a reminder to people that there's still an opportunity to post your questions in the question box, and that we will be asking questions at the end. And yes, Heidi, all of the presentations will be posted in addition to the recording and made available. So people could go back and absorb more of the information in your slideshow as they have the time. So with that, we are going to welcome Karen Hamilton from King County. And Heidi, thank you. And I'm going to recommend you turn off your camera.
Thank you.
Not that you aren't gorgeous, but there you go. Okay. Hello, Karen. Take it away. Thank you.
And Heidi, can you turn over the presenter controls, please?
I already hit the stop showing screen.
That's okay. I'll do it. Don't worry. Yep. Hang on.
Well, thank you, Heidi, for giving that California perspective. That's really helpful. We always look to California to lead the way, and hope to do the same in Washington. And to the attendees, welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm going to kick off the local perspective of recycled content legislation and policy in King County, Washington, which is the area surrounding the city of Seattle. My name is Karen Hamilton, and I'm going to talk about the state and local context and actions and successes so far. Then I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about the current state and prioritizing our actions. And then finally to Andy, who will talk about future plans and partnerships. Next slide, please. So I can't talk about local government without setting the context that Washington State helps us set the stage for with requirements and guidance. There are several laws that are applicable to recycled content requirements, and many of these go back to 1992. The state created requirements for themselves to increase the purchase of recycled content products, including anything from recycled paper to re-refined motor oil, latex paint, tires, etc. They also required a bid preference for recycled content items, and later on they added 100% recycled content copy paper requirements. For local government, they asked us to do the same, to really create some minimum purchasing goals, revise policies, set goals and designated procurement contacts with the optional price preference, encouraging adoption of either the state practice or for us to create our own policy, and also to adopt specifications for compost for roads projects. So a lot of local jurisdictions took that to heart, and King County being one of them, and really rounding out our recycled product procurement. Later on, the state created some requirements around recycled concrete aggregate, which includes reuse and recycling of construction aggregate. And for the state, that's a minimum requirement to use it on 25% recycled content on the project. And for local government, it asks us to put it in our bid that all things being equal, that we will award it to recycled concrete aggregate. I'm happy to report that we've had a long use of these materials, but having the state forms and requirements in our bids helps deliver that message to the marketplace that this is something that we want statewide. So it creates more availability and market development around that. Next slide, please. So we had a promising start to 2020 for beverage containers, and then COVID happened. I'm happy to hear that California might be on the verge of passing this, which will definitely help us. The reason it was vetoed was because of the budget, the COVID emergency. There was concern about enough budget for administration and enforcement costs, and that's what Heidi talked about. It's hard to have this legislation without some enforcement and auditing. So we're really hoping that next year we can pick up the torch. It has a similar timeline, it looks like, as California, with an initial 10% and then moving to 50% by 2030. Next slide, please. So in a local government context, we can help our local jurisdictions, like our suburban cities, meet some of these requirements. You know, we often make our bids available where they can use, also buy recycled content items from the vendors that we use. But another way is in our policies, we have a minimum requirement to use 10% recycled plastic in recyclable collection containers. And this is for the haulers have to provide those for our curbside pickup. And some cities have ramped that requirement up to even 40%. So it's another way for us to influence the marketplace and make it a requirement more regionally. Next slide, please. King County has a long history of buying recycled products, and we first adopted our policy in 1989, just asking for recycled content products. We adopted EPA's comprehensive procurement guidelines, which includes anything from recycled paper, lubricating oil, toner cartridges, plastic products, and compost. We had a lot of early success. We tracked our purchases, produced annual reports, provided training and education, and it really helped try to increase recyclable markets in our area to make sure that we were buying back all the recyclables that we were collecting. So there was a really great push in the late 80s, early 90s for that market development work. And after a few years, we found that we were having great success, but we wanted to add other products in. So we updated to environmentally preferable products, which is better for human health and the environment. So we included more resource efficient, more durable, less toxic products. But the recycled content was still at the core of our policy decisions. We started looking to more eco labels to help us prove that what we were buying was more environmentally preferable, and that included some recycled content, third-party certifications as well. And then a couple of years ago, we even updated our policy further to incorporate environmental, social, and fiscal goals associated with our procurement. And as I stated before, recycled content is still at the core, but I think by diversifying our policy, we've lost a little focus on recycled content. And I think that has to do with some of the local market availability, not as many local manufacturers to support some of our projects, but we are still very dedicated to it, and we count it among our successes when we do. Another thing that we have a green building ordinance that requires the use of a lot of recycled content building materials, and points are given either through the LEED rating system when we do green buildings or through our internal sustainable infrastructure scorecard for items such as recycled concrete, asphalt, other aggregates, and compost. So we do track how well we're doing on our building projects internally to King County. Next slide, please. I would just like to highlight a project that we did when we really tried to influence the marketplace and up our minimum standards to 100% post-consumer recycled content copy paper. We did this in 2011, just pairing it with a 30% paper waste reduction. I'd really like to thank the City of Seattle for leading the way, and the state for also adopting this. We wanted to really do it on a statewide level, that we were asking for this in the marketplace, and it definitely was available. We did have some implementation challenges at first because our contract that we had in place had 30% and 100% recycled content paper both on contract. And when people saw that side by side, they usually picked the lower cost option, even though we were really promoting it as you won't have any additional cost because you're reducing your paper consumption. And we printed education such as the graphics on the right to show how we were doing along the way. I'm happy to report that when that contract expired, we decided to just ask for 100% recycled content paper, and we were happy with the results because of we had increased purchase data. Then we got a better price, and since it was the only option, it's much harder to not use that option and use our contract. So our compliance shot way up to almost 100% instantly. And the story there is that, you know, we continue to ask for that paper. We've had success in also reducing our paper consumption by 35% since our baseline of 2010, and seeing a 23% cost reduction. And now in the future, you know, we're facing other choices besides recycled content. We look to, there's non-wood fiber sources, there's other carbon neutral products, for stewardship certified type products. And I think we're at a turning point where we've mandated some things in the past and found success, but we are definitely needing to refocus to keep recycled content top of mind. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Emily to discuss the current state for modernizing and prioritizing recycled content. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Let me switch the slide. So as Karen mentioned, we have learned a lot of lessons over the past few decades, and we want to integrate these lessons into new approaches and avenues for tackling recycled content. We now know that markets became overly reliant on exports, and because of this, our market development programs weren't focused on the major materials like paper and plastic. So now we must refocus our efforts and our policies to ensure that we're building and maintaining these markets regionally. Climate has also become a major focus and policy driver in our region and across the country. And there are some other priorities that have become important focus areas since recycled content's beginnings, like Karen mentioned. And we must weave these into our recycled content development work. And another example of this is equity and social justice. So for success at the county, we have found that recycled content should not just stand alone. It should be incorporated and aligned with other policies, plans, and initiatives to ensure that it isn't pushed to the side. Two very natural fits for this included recycled content initiatives that were in our Responsible Recycling Task Force and in our Zero Waste of Resources planning. The former, which is called RRTF, was created to respond to China's sword. And they developed a number of recommendations for program and policy planning, which included both recycled content and market development. King County has a zero waste of resources by 2030 goal, which is in a county policy. And we're building out a plan to meet that goal, which should be finalized early next year. But a main part of that implementation of that goal is going to be recycled content strategies and market development. Next, the King County has a 5-year blueprint for confronting climate change, which is called our Strategic Climate Action Plan, or SCAP for short. The 2020 update is with our council for approval now, but it includes priority actions around purchasing recycled content materials and building markets for these materials. So a common theme is we're weaving this throughout many different plans and policies. Finally, King County has an equity and social justice plan, and historically our recycled content work has not focused on incorporating equity into its work planning, which we are making a conscious effort to change that throughout improving our contracting processes and building in more robust equity criteria into our market development programs, which will allow us to better align with this countywide initiative. So by weaving recycled content across plans and policies, we hope to ensure that this work isn't siloed and remains a priority across the county and the region. So those are just some of our high-level policy drivers that help support our work. And now Andy is going to go into more details on other strategies and the importance of our network of partners.
Yeah, thanks, Emily, for that. You can go on to the next slide. I think it's useful to know a few things about market development to begin with. So King County's had a recycled material market development program for the better part of 15 years. And until China saw disruption to our market, the program was really focused on how to deliver kind of the broader zero waste goal. So the hard to recycle materials that we definitely want out of the waste stream, where there weren't either overseas or local markets to take the products or materials. So think sort of asphalt shingles and mattresses were really the focus of the program. So as Emily mentioned, the Responsible Recycling Task Force recommended that we switch our focus to the more mainstream materials of plastic, paper, and organics. The so-called sort of trilemma of materials that are in our waste stream that we have to tackle in order to get to our zero waste commitment. On paper, being responsive to that recommendation, we're working with consultant partners to deliver a paper market assessment to help shape the work. It will provide us with some hopefully much needed evidence, and we'll be publishing that later next month if folk are interested to view it. Generally, and maybe I would say this, but I think there's really first-class work happening here in Washington. I don't know if people have seen, but the recent plastics packaging study from the State Department of Ecology is a really great example of that. So really kind of, drilling down into kind of what the market conditions are and what the future might hold. But as Emily introduced, material markets and our work on them, as a local jurisdiction, does not happen in isolation. whether it's the climate crisis or the inequities in King County for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, and delivering waste are so closely tied together, we need to think of them in that way. So diverting material waste from the waste stream is a huge business opportunity. Implementing diversion without regard for either climate or the inequities that exist will only create more market failure for the future. That will ultimately mean that we have to take time and effort and crucially our resources in order to fix them. So we're now shifting our thinking about how these different but connected dimensions can be more integrated into our planning, both for the county and also with our partners. But we recognize that we don't have the tools to do that right now. And I think is the county's role. So we work with our city partners and the community and the private sector. We often find ourselves as a convener and influencer, and we'd like to be able to equip others to be able to do the same. So together with the City of Seattle and some other regional partners, we'll shortly be seeking consultant support to help update and deliver a new consumption-based emissions inventory to replace our current one. This inventory will try and estimate the global emissions and climate impacts from the goods and services consumed by King County's 2.2 million residents, the countless visitors that come to Seattle and Bellevue and Redmond, and our outstanding natural beauty that we have here in the county, and also the business community that calls King County home. Last time we ran an inventory, we found that more than half of our emissions happen outside of our borders. And so that really sort of underscores the need to work upstream and for it to be an essential component of our market development work. Along with the inventory, we also want to use more life cycle analysis. And I'm sure the people on this webinar have seen the exceptional work that the state of Oregon has been doing. And we hope to sort of build on that and augment it to provide insight into our own zero waste planning. Developing and building the evidence helps make the case for why recycled content is a vital element of the option box for the future. I'd like to also say that finally our research has shown that King County residents are strongly motivated to do the right thing, but lack the knowledge and insights to help shape better choices. So in addition to inventory work and looking at evidencing the life cycle analysis, we also want to be able to use and leverage the existing recycled content databases and lists to help build a toolkit to help people make better choices. We need to try and make it as simple as possible for people to choose products with recycled content and then deliver the emission reduction that's linked to it while also building equity. Next slide. So Heidi has already touched on the circular economy, and I'm confident that the people on this webinar are already familiar with the concept. So I won't dwell on this slide for too long. But just to say two things, I think first, as a local jurisdiction, we inhabit the use, reuse, recycling, and disposal stages of the value chain. But without more action in the resources and production stages to minimize waste and to keep materials in use longer, we won't be able to achieve what our residents and ratepayers and communities tell us is important to them, which is they want less plastic waste and more plastic reuse and recycling. And secondly, we don't have the levers as a local jurisdiction to make that happen by ourselves. So we've been really seeking out partnerships to help deliver sustainable material flows around the county. Next slide. So working in partnership is going to be key to achieving our goals, and that's no different from for recycled content. We need to kind of learn much more about what has worked to deliver kind of clean and green growth elsewhere, and we need systems to provide assurance on recycled content claims. So, for example, around chains of custody. We need to learn what we can. We need to learn from other kind of ways of kind of driving change, for example, with carbon markets, and how markets have driven and been part of an integral policy landscape that in places have driven significant emission reductions. And so, we could incentivize more infrastructure investment to offset, virgin plastic use throughout the economy. a bit like when you take, I guess, when you take like an essential flight to somewhere else in the world, and you want to take action to be able to kind of offset the impacts from that journey. You know, could we learn from that sort of like offsetting system and build a system for other materials, plastic and paper? I think that's why we're so excited about the Green Blue initiative for the recycled material standard. And we're really looking forward to the discussion at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition conference next week, where Laura Thompson, who works for Green Blue, will be chairing a panel to update on progress for the work. So I'd highly recommend tuning into that, because I know I will be. King County, along with other regional jurisdictions, have also joined the US Plastic Pact. Core to this effort is delivering a promise of significant recycled content use. And the pact has set significant and ambitious goals, and we're now looking forward to partnering with them to achieve their set outcomes. We're also excited to work with the State Department of Ecology and Commerce around the new Washington State Recycling Development Center agenda. We think that 2021 has the potential for strong action on, in particular, plastic packaging in Washington State. And then finally, at a local level, we're working with our regional partners to make King County a place where people want to innovate, and deliver future forward business opportunities. Next slide. So in summary, I think we recognize that our early action in developing kind of local legislative frameworks on recycled content has helped provide a real essential bedrock for our current actions and goals for the future. As Karen noted, you know, our focus has, you know, been drawn elsewhere, but now I think is a moment where we can really return to recycled content. But crucially, we have to do that work in partnership. King County isn't an island, and materials flow in and out of our borders that are outside of our direct control. So although 2020 is a slightly peculiar year, you know, to say the least, it feels like this is a moment where we can take real action on plastic in particular, but on materials generally. And I guess the sort of challenge that I have for everyone on the webinar is, you know, could we together make 2021 be a transformative year for recycled content? You know, whether it's 2020 or 21 or a year beyond that, you know, working in partnership with the private sector, I think the public sector is, you know, well positioned for kind of developing recycled content commitments, policies and laws, and it, you know, they are likely to remain an essential ingredient to success. So then on to the final slide. We've now got to the end of our presentation. I hope that you know, we've inspired some enthusiasm for our recycled content work, and we've provided you with some food for thought on how you and your organizations might be able to kind of think about recycled content. So I think now's the time in the presentation where I think we're all going to switch our cameras back on and take a few questions.
Well, just sensational presentations, everybody. So appreciated, learned a great deal, and inspired as well. Several comments have remarked on Andy's inspirational final comments. Lots of questions, but I'm still going to encourage other people to post questions. We have, I hope, adequate time. So I'm going to try to cluster some of them thematically. And I'm going to encourage or remind our speakers to unmute themselves when they are planning to speak. So we have some questions that relate either directly or indirectly to collection. So some of the direct questions relate to single stream and whether materials collected in single stream, and specifically glass was called out, are actually able to be used in new products. And Heidi, the question actually was first posted when you were presenting, wondering about the great success that we've seen in California with your minimum recycled content in glass, and is any of that glass coming from single stream?
Yes, but it's not, it's very expensive because it's broken and it's not, you know, it's hard to sort. So if we want really cost-effective closed loop systems for glass, we're going to have to unscramble the egg and go back to clean sorting by color. And if you look at Europe, like when I was in Belgium, their recovery rates are very, very high for their packaging program. They had igloos in every single neighborhood. So everything went at the curb in a bag, a clear bag for all packaging except for glass. And in every neighborhood, as you left for the day, you would drop off your glass by color in the igloos and go. And then the manufacturers would come pick them up, and it was all sorted by color. So it was very, very easy to sort. And we've made it extremely difficult. And MRFs break the glass, they break in the carts, they break when it's going into the truck. So and then it's contaminating the paper. So now that it's not just the glass that's the problem, it's the paper. So we've got to get back to the basics and decide if we're going to continue to commingle. I don't see how we're going to get huge volumes of glass back that are high quality enough that are going to, and it contaminates the paper, which is a double problem.
Great. So we have a companion question from a company who actually makes products with post-consumer content. And they note that there just isn't enough being collected. So what is the relationship or the opportunities for your initiatives, state, local, county, to support that? Having minimum recycled content mandates, requirements isn't going to accomplish what they want if nobody's recycling. That can be answered by anybody.
I can start. Just in California, our bottle bill's kind of falling apart, and we've lost many, many recycling centers in the state, and we've got parts of the state that have really no coverage for collection. And it's at a time when, with COVID, that people are really desperate to get their money back from their deposits. So we've got a double problem in that all of a sudden our infrastructure for glass and some of these products is going down at a time when we need it the most. And we're hearing from Gallo, they can't make enough wine bottles with high enough post-consumer content if we don't collect more. So it all kind of, that's why they set up the commission, and hopefully we can get to the root of these issues and make good recommendations in January, at least in California.
And King County, want to contribute to the response? You're all muted, so somebody has to volunteer.
I always forget to unmute myself. I would sort of tend to agree with Heidi. Here in King County, we, 70% of the materials that we send to our landfill, we think, can be used, and there should be markets for. Infrastructure and processing and collection are going to be a huge part of how we kind of move towards zero waste. And so, we have a task force at the moment that is looking at, the different options on moving towards zero waste. And, we would really expect as part of that work that we consider these things. And so, it's a huge opportunity, but, to echo what Heidi said to the last question, how do we deal with contamination, especially around paper, is a huge issue when it comes to glass. And I think it's going to be really challenging kind of moving forward, especially, if there are representatives from the paper industry up here. I think they would say the same thing. Like, how do we really move forward as a region to drive the rates of recycling and collection that we need and want, while also commingling with glass? And I think it's a question that we really, as a region, not just with King County, but the Puget Sound area, that we're really going to have to grapple with.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. So there are also questions about how can you actually increase recycled content purchasing behavior in government entities. So of course you all spoke to requirements about products, but that doesn't necessarily mean that state and that local, county and state governments are actually electing to buy these products. So what can you do to motivate that?
I can start. In California, one of the things that I think has been very effective is we require, if you're submitting for a state grant through CalRecycle, through our hazardous waste grants or reuse grants or any of the grants, they have to have a recycled content procurement policy and show that in the documentation before they could even win their grant awards. That's been a big driver in California.
So a policy, not a requirement, though.
No, it's a requirement. They have to have the I mean, we don't check receipts and all of that, obviously, because that would be too time consuming. So yeah, I guess they have to be able to show the resolution when they submit their grant application.
Okay. And King County?
We rely a lot on policy, but there's not a lot of enforcement behind it, but we take it seriously. So we ask for recycled content products in our bids and make those available to other jurisdictions to use. So we set a standard for ourselves to have compliance to that, but you know, it's good to have as many requirements as you can, and just to make sure, and accountability and reporting helps see where you're meeting those goals or where you're lacking. You know, I said we did have some trouble when we tried to shoot higher for 100% recycled content paper, and that took a little while, but we found a bid strategy that would help us. So if you're in sustainability, work with procurement and end users. It's a lot about educating what is even on contract and what the requirements are. It's really confusing out there. So the more you can do to guide the decision makers into making it easy, like look for the EPA symbols. You know, we just mirror a lot of what EPA says for eco labels, including recycled content. So we say, look for this content, even when you're browsing a catalog for something, even for office supplies, look for that, and we'll be tallying up how well we're doing.
Great, thank you. Now, Heidi volunteered that in California, there's, I'll call it a carrot, to inspire purchasing, that if you secure a state grant, that you have to be doing it. Does either the state of Washington or King County have a similar requirement?
I know that we did at one time for our solid waste division goals, and I'm not sure about current state. Emily and Andy, you might know. Back at the very beginning, they too had to have a recycled content procurement policy, and that saw a lot of city activity with grants that we offered to cities, but I'm uncertain about the current state.
Okay, I don't know, Emily or Andy, did you want to add to that response?
It's not necessarily a requirement for grants, but we are encouraging our cities to use some of our waste prevention grants to purchase recycled content and to support market development.
Great. Okay. So just to clarify, before I actually ask the question that was posted, in California, in King County, the minimum recycled content requirements apply to ... products sold into the state, products manufactured in the state, products manufactured within a local jurisdiction, something else. So what does the requirement actually apply to? So why don't we start with King County this time?
That's a good question. Most of it has to do with products purchased within at least the state, not necessarily manufactured within the county. Is the best that I can answer that.
Okay. And Heidi, what about California?
Depends on the program. So the state agency Buy Recycle campaign is clearly for what the state purchases. But the rigid plastic packaging container program I talked about, that is requires manufacturers that sell into the state. The same with newsprint. And the trash bag law is minimum 10% post-consumer to produce the trash bags sold in California. So again, it depends on the program, but it's mostly what's sold in California.
Sold in. So are any of you aware of a requirement that manufacturers of a product within a jurisdiction have to use post-consumer content?
No, so you're thinking locally, like, or within the state that we say, if you site here, you have to use certain minimum.
Yeah, or perhaps the inverse, Heidi, of what you were saying about requiring purchasing, so you get a state loan or a state grant for business development, you have to ensure that some component of your products have recycled content.
I actually haven't seen that, but I really like that idea. I mean, that could be one of the recommendations to the commission, is to say we should be looking at giving incentives, for example, making it easier to get a recycling market development zone loan, or allow the loan amount to be double if they have a higher post-consumer content, for example. I think that's a very creative, positive idea, and I love it. So thanks for asking the question.
And Washington people, King County people, have you encountered anything like that?
I certainly haven't, but I echo Heidi. That sounds like a great idea, and it's something that we should definitely kind of reflect on. Although I've only been in kind of King County for 18 months, so Karen, Emily, I'm not sure if you're aware of anything.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so possibly a simple question. I think this refers to King County. Where is the recycled content program database? Where would somebody find that?
So I think that might be sort of in relation to one of my slides. So I think one of the things we want to create is that sort of repository of information, and we know that the EPA and others have kind of databases of recycled content and where to find it. We don't find that consumers and businesses know much about that, and so we want to put it in a place where it's really easy to access. I think Karen, Emily, you might have kind of more insight on the procurement side.
We don't have a database per se. What we look to is providing guidance on what the minimum standards, eco labels, contracts we have available that have recycled content items on them. But we don't have our own database of products and manufacturers.
Okay. So do any of your programs, either geographic group here, make a distinction between post-consumer and just more generic recycled content?
Yeah, most of ours do.
And which do they require?
Post-consumer.
Post-consumer.
But sometimes we'll allow, general recycled content, or in post-industrial and post-consumer, they'll give levels for both, because it's very different, obviously.
But it will define a different percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Different. Okay. And what about King County?
Similar here, we prefer post-consumer, but there are some allowances, and that's also where we look to the comprehensive procurement guidelines from the EPA that sets some of those minimum requirements. There's usually breakdown for post-consumer and post-industrial.
Great. Do either Washington or California count waste to energy or alternative daily cover as part of recycling?
Oh, that's a hard no.
And Washington?
So for King County, we don't. It's a separate part of the waste hierarchy for us.
Okay. So we've had a few questions that relate to certification. Some noting, boy, that would really help. If I actually had somebody promising me, other than the company manufacturing something. But we also have a comment that, as a business, particularly a small business, or maybe not a gigantic business, that could be a breaking point where it would make it fiscally impossible for them to continue to make products with post-consumer recycled content. So I wondered if you had any comment on that, and then I'll throw in an additional question to that. And have any of your programs thought about the state taking on an oversight certification rather than requiring it of an individual product, where the state would have a program where it would verify? So what about King County first? What about the cost for certification and the impact to a business?
So for recycled content only, there's, I don't see many third-party certifications for that. There are a couple certifying bodies that do that work. So it's often not a requirement of our procurements because there's not enough competition, so to speak. I've never heard of the state wanting to take that on, but since there's no representative here, I won't promise anything.
Oh, go ahead, promise it. Okay.
It is hard. We have to take the company's word for it right now, where we have more leeway with other eco labels that can have a third-party certification for that. Those requirements that for environmentally preferable products, not necessarily just recycled content. So it is a little bit lacking in certification right now, and so for recycled content.
Okay. And Heidi, what's the perspective in California on this?
I think that's, one of the things that we actually have a gap in this country is clear certifiers for recycled content. I don't think it makes any sense. We've discussed it actually in California. Should the state do it? Should maybe some of the NGOs take it on? I've talked to UL and begged them to get into this because we need a real certifier for recycled content that's third party, that's national, that all the states can look to and feel confident that that's verified. I mean, look at what happened with VW. I know the person who actually took them down and found out that they were fibbing about the emissions from those cars. But you can't have systems where you don't verify the accuracy of the data. And that's the problem we've got right now. We cannot continue to just rely on honesty. Unfortunately, integrity is kind of short shrift right now in our systems, and we have to be able to verify that what's being told to us is true, especially if we're putting it in law. So I would really encourage UL and others to get into this space. We need consistent, reliable third-party verifier of recycled content across the board.
And Lynn,
Great.
would you mind me just adding to that? I think I mentioned one of the kind of potential schemes that's being developed, the RMS by Green Blue. And I think as the recycled content commitments come online from the producers, especially around packaging, we're going to see, I think, a lot more work in this space. And so therefore, kind of using these compliance systems, as more and more producers use them, the costs will come down. And so I'm quite hopeful for the future that participation in compliance won't be a particularly large business barrier.
Okay, great.
I would just agree that I think it's better at a third-party certification or at a national level. That makes more sense instead of each state or local jurisdiction trying to do their own.
Okay. So does King County government offices, do you collect office paper separately, or does it go into a combined paper recycling program? This is leading up to something. So, but that's part A of the question.
Yes, in our offices we collect
What's the
paper.
Okay, the reason we ask is, are there any opportunities for you to then specify that the paper that you are recycling is used in the paper you are mandating?
That's a good question. I think it's gotten harder instead of easier because we've lost some of our local manufacturers, the paper mills. There aren't as many in the state as there used to be, so you'd have to travel a farther distance, and then especially to get 100% recycled content paper, it might be more challenging. So it's not unheard of, but it really has to do with local market development, if that makes sense. And we have the local manufacturers who can take that material.
Right.
In the past, I think we've been more successful with that by having manufacturers within the state, but especially with paper and copy paper that seems to have fewer manufacturers.
Okay, great. So Heidi, you had commented when you were talking about the glass recycled content program, that there are incentives for clean glass. And could you amplify on that, please?
Yeah, I put the link because we don't have time to get into much detail on all this stuff, but there's an incentive program that's given for improving the quality and the marketability of the glass collected. Certifying recyclers and processors, they are, through the bottle bill program, are encouraged to clean and color sort the glass to return them for that incentive payment. So it's really very specific to the bottle bill, and it was part of the bottle bill. And I don't know the exact details of the program because I don't have time to keep up on every little detail, but that's why I put the link too, so you can see exactly how much they're paying and for what level of cleanliness, et cetera.
That's great. That's great. Now, do any of you have familiarity with requirements that, in addition to post-consumer recycled content, emphasize reuse or remanufactured products?
There's a lot of discussion about this, obviously. I would like to see, and this is a big discussion on the Recycling Commission, is how we really go upstream and focus on refilling bottles before we even get to the point of recycling the bottles and the glass. Refilling 1 pound propane cylinders instead of buying and disposing of them. And do we have policies that actually add fees maybe to the disposables versus, or incentives to the, and that's kind of the eco-modulated fee idea, is to put the real life cycle cost visible to the consumer in a fee that says, hey, this is not good and you're going to pay for it, and this is better and you're not going to pay so much because the costs are lower to manage it. I think there's a lot of discussion and a lot of hope. I have Andy's thought that next year could be a breakout year for action, depending on the election. And I'm just going to say it outright. Everybody needs to vote. If you think that what we do is not political, then I don't know where you've been, because everything we do is political. We deal with very big companies that have a lot of money to influence policy. And we need to have voices, hopefully partnerships with these companies so that we can work together, but sometimes we don't agree. I mean, the bottom line is they're answering to corporations, shareholders, and profit making. And we're sometimes trying to ask them to internalize these costs, and that goes against every grain that they have to make profit. So, but we can't keep externalizing these costs onto government and the environment. So we've got to have policymakers that will help back us up when we do suggest these policies, and hopefully companies that will come with us and see that there is better branding for those companies that lead. And then we can help them get that kind of credit when they do the right thing and have higher recycled content.
King County?
We encourage a lot of reuse, remanufactured items, closed loop recycling among our, the products that we buy and services. But there's definitely more we could do to keep things in use, even through our surplus department, making sure it's redistributed in a good manner and then donated to nonprofits. We definitely want to do more of it and keep track of it.
Great. So I have a last, probably relatively gigantic question. So I'll just advise the audience, unless more questions are posted, this will be the last question. So the price of purchasing products with recycled content, it's always been a matter of concern. It certainly has been a critical point of conversation in government entities, and at least it used to be that one way that government entities would cushion the blow would be to have laws that allowed for not buying something that was the lowest price, but some percentage of price cushioning. You can go 10% over or whatnot. But that doesn't require entities to be willing to spend that much more money. And we're also seeing that with increased, both the laws that you are proposing, where there'll be increased competition for recycled content. And Heidi, you alluded to the fact that early on that there's actually a shortage of materials for some products. And then we're seeing increased brand commitments. say they're going to do it. What does that do to pricing and the potentially unintentional punitive impact on purchasers who would want to do it but can't do it?
So
I want to say, go ahead.
So for King County, early on, we did adopt a price preference for recycled content items, and that helped in the initial stages because there wasn't a lot of competition. We were trying to educate the marketplace of what our requirements were and what our minimum standards were. And after a few years, we found that it became more of a crutch for us, because then people bidding knew exactly how much more we were willing to pay for something that was exactly the same that we wanted. So a better approach for us was just asking for that item and not comparing it to a virgin product. So I also gave the example for coffee paper. When we moved to 100%, we got way better pricing when we just said, we want 100%. What will you give us in on pricing? Now, that doesn't always work, but the more you can be specific in what you want and what the minimum requirements are that you need, then you tend to get better pricing for it. And if you compare it with virgin products or more apples to oranges, you're really not going to get the good price comparison anyway. So that's how we found the ability to just ask for what we want and get better pricing.
Okay. And Heidi?
All right,
Well,
Doug wants a hug. I totally agree with everything she said. You've got to be careful because you don't want to drive costs up unnecessarily. But as I said on the One State Agency Buy Recycle campaign, I think that we've got to allow our state agencies to pay more to drive the market, because right now they're not even allowed to. So we want to leave it up to them. But again, the commission hasn't finished this work, so I don't know where we're going to actually land on our recommendations. But we know that for a fact, sometimes the early adopters, you have to pay a little bit more to drive down the pricing. I mean, that's what Tesla did. They started with these expensive cars, and now they're getting down into the price ranges that everybody can afford. But those that could afford those expensive cars helped drive the entire thing. And that's what happened with solar panels and other innovations. So I get worried when we require 3 bids. That's the other problem, because 3 bids is a problem when you've got an innovator who's by themselves and leading the market in some new really cool thing that might be a little expensive, but we're not also incorporating the back end costs. And I'm also urging us to look at the holistic cost. So if a state's buying electronics and they're only looking at the cost of the electronics, but they're not looking at how long they'll last or how much they have to pay at end of life to deal with them, then we're not really looking at the whole cost of the issue, just this little tiny piece. And that's what's leaving us in this box that we can't seem to get out of. So I encourage whole cost accounting.
great.
Yeah,
So,
and there's other strategies. You know, we do have to accept low bid, so the strategy there would be asking for 100% recycled content instead of 30%, see what pricing you get. Other strategies could be more of a request for a proposal where you pair it with cost as just one of the factors, and we have to make the internal decisions as King County if that's what we want to move forward as a minimum standard and that we're willing to pay for it, because we can do a lot on the back end of that, the life cycle cost assessment or other factors. When, you know, we do this a lot with vehicles and other equipment where we're looking at long-term goals, not initial purchase price. So there's definitely some procurement strategies you can implement to help reduce those costs and not just say, we're going to pay whatever the marketplace says, but really try to be mindful of how to do that within your current laws and legislation.
great, fascinating. So a little bit of a switching gears. King County noted the importance of environmental justice in their remarks and in their initiatives. So what can local and regional governments do to drive environmental justice as a companion to market development?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think, going back to the basics, take a look who is involved in your policy and program development. Does it represent the communities that you serve? And then really look at the sort of like the business opportunity that comes from change. And then I would ask the question, how many BIPOC-owned businesses are involved in those discussions? What is the opportunity to sort of make sure that opportunity is exposed and felt by all? And I think, starting from the very basic, which is the involvement of people, will help the policy development. I have to say, I have to hold up, our hands to say we don't have the answer to that. We don't think we've got it right in the past, but we want to make it better for the future. And so I think the process that we're going through at the moment is going to furnish us with hopefully the strategies to be able to do that better. So maybe ask that question in a year's time or 2 years' time, where we've had these discussions. I don't know if Emily or Karen, you have anything to add on that.
No, I think the main thing is just listening to the community and bringing them in for decision making, and making sure when you bring them in that you are actually acting on what they bring to the table.
I agree. And that's why we added, and I mentioned at the beginning, we've just added 4 new board members are BIPOC, people of color, and highly qualified. And we put the call out because we were not reflecting the community, and we feel like we are doing a much better job of that now, and they're at the decision-making table. So that's the key, because if you just look, I'm just looking here, I mean, all of us are white. We're not reflecting the whole of the community. So just, we have work to do in that area for sure. All of us.
Great. Well, with that, I thank you. That was fabulous. I mean, I didn't mean to short shrift any of your amazing conversation or remarks. I will note that NERC has a conference coming up where environmental justice in the context of recycling and recycling markets is one of the sessions. So you might want to take a look at that. In addition to thanking our sponsors that have been on their screen and our speakers most sincerely, I want to also note that on October 6th, we'll be having a webinar about voluntary initiatives. Brands and trade associations will be presenting, and it's about plastic. As was pointed out to me by a trade association from another niche. Why is it only plastics? So I hadn't even noticed. So I want to say thank you all so incredibly much. A reminder that the recording and the PowerPoint presentations will be posted on the NERC website, as well as the NMOA website. You'll be getting an email from GoToWebinar in 24 hours telling you where to find that. And with that, again, a fabulous webinar and presentations. And I'll say good afternoon. I think it is actually afternoon now with everybody, and have a good balance of your week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So much for having us, Lynn. Bye,
You're
Terry.
welcome.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.